They came without warning, not through the warp, not from the cold stars of segmentum obscurus, but through the silence between galaxies. A presence without soul, without the warp's whisper, without even the echo of fear. We called them machines. That was our first mistake. They were not machines. They were hunger given form, logic wrapped around void. The first astropath to sense them screamed without sound. His mind ruptured as the choir tore itself apart. No demon, no Xenos, no heretic. Just a blankness that ate meaning itself. The Borg did not conquer. They absorbed. And when they found the Imperium of man, they found not weakness, but resistance forged in unending agony. They found a god emperor who had already died 1,000 times and yet refused oblivion. They found a humanity so broken it could not be broken further. And in that ruin the Borg hesitated, for the first time in their cold eternity. But hesitation is not mercy. It is a calculation. And when calculation meets faith, when logic meets madness, the galaxy becomes a crucible. The voxnet of the segmentum solar carried the first word of their arrival, a word so alien it defied translation. It spread like a contagion across the data streams of Mars, through the synaptic networks of the Mechanicus, through the binary prayers of Skitarii cohorts. It was not a threat. It was a promise. We are the Borg. You will be assimilated. If you've ever wondered what happens when the cold perfection of the Borg meets the relentless brutality of the first millennium, when the warp meets the Collective, then stay with me. Like the adepts of Mars recording the last data streams of a dying forge world, your watch, your voice, and your presence keep this chronicle alive. So before we dive deeper, lend your strength. Subscribe, share, and let the machine spirit of the algorithm know that the Omnissiah's light still burns in the darkness. The first sign was not a light, but its absence. The Astronomicon, that holy beacon that pierced the void and guided a million vessels through the madness of the warp, wavered. Not extinguished, not corrupted, but dimmed as though the Emperor himself had drawn a slow, uncertain breath. On the bridge of the Imperial frigate in Nomine Veritas, Navigator Lysara felt the shimmer of its weakening through the veins of her third eye. The familiar radiance that bathed her soul faltered, and where there should have been blinding divine presence, there was nothing. No whisper of demons, no maddened echoes, just silence, cold and infinite. Captain Arrest Varen gripped the brass rail of the command dais, his knuckles pale beneath the sheen of promethium light. The Vox grills crackled with the uneasy prayers of the crew. They had crossed voids haunted by the warp screams before, but this perfect mathematical stillness, why, was something else. Even the Geller field hummed out of rhythm, as though uncertain what it was protecting against. Servitors stood frozen mid-task, their augmetic eyes flickering with phantom code, and in the deep dark between stars, an object approached without translation signature, without energy distortion, without a single warp echo. It was the Magos on the lower deck who first recognized the pattern. He watched the Auspex readings, not as a man reads a map, but as a priest reads scripture. The signal did not pulse, it folded, recursive, elegant, terrifyingly precise. The Borg were not arriving through space. They were rewriting it. The Magos whispered a warning to the bridge. There is no warp bleed, no energy flux. They are moving faster than light, but not through it. His voice trembled with awe. Omnissiah, preserve us. They are using the fabric of reality as code. When the first Borg vessel materialized, the void itself seemed to hesitate. A perfect sphere, matte black against the starlight, its surface crawled with shifting tessellations of machinery. No life signs, no emissions, no declaration of intent. Just silence, absolute and suffocating. The frigate's Vox operators opened a hail in High Gothic, then Low Gothic, then Binary Cant. Each time, the reply was the same. A pulse of data so compressed it shattered half the cogitators aboard. Then the voice came. It was not spoken. It was imposed. Every mind aboard the Nomine Veritas felt it simultaneously. Mechanical, toneless, yet intimately human in cadence. We are the Borg. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. Resistance is futile. The words hung like a curse in the recycled air. 100 laser guns clicked into readiness. The commissar began a prayer to the Emperor. Lysara pressed her trembling hands to her temples as her third eye tried desperately to see into the warp, but found nothing. The Borg existed outside it, untouchable by chaos, unmarked by faith. To the Psyker's senses, they were a hole in reality itself. Captain Varen ordered the ship's lance batteries to fire. Bolts of incandescent energy lanced outward, bathing the sphere in annihilation's light. When the glare faded, the sphere was untouched. Not a scorch mark, not a deviation in its motion. It drifted closer, indifferent. Then, without visible propulsion, it unleashed a lattice of emerald beams that carved the frigate open like parchment. Atmosphere howled into the void. Crewmen screamed prayers that went unanswered. And in the heart of the devastation, Lysara saw something impossible. The shards of her dying vessel knitting themselves into the sphere's surface, absorbed molecule by molecule. The last thing she heard before the void claimed her was the whisper of 1,000 voices speaking as one. They did not mock. They did not hate. They simply declared, "You will be improved." On the listening outpost of Varnus Reach, orbiting the dead moon of Karad IV, an astropathic choir received the fragmented screams of the In Nomine Veritas. The data that followed was unlike anything in Imperial record, pure logic, perfectly structured, yet entirely devoid of soul. The chief astropath wept blood as he interpreted the final transmission. "It's not warp-tainted," he gasped, clutching his temples. "It's clean." Then his heart stopped. His mind burned out like a candle in vacuum, and the data kept transmitting long after his body fell. Within the hour, the silence spread. Choirs went dark. Astropaths across the segmentum solar fell wordless and cold. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica declared it a psychic pandemic, but there was no warp signature, no trace of malefic interference. The silence was total, mathematical, and spreading at light speed. And deep beneath the dust of Mars, inside the logic crypts of the Fabricator General, data scribes stared in disbelief as alien code began to appear within sacred noospheric archives, self-replicating, perfect, and untranslatable. A binary phrase repeated endlessly in machine cant. "We are one." The Emperor's light had not gone out. It had been surrounded. On the third day after the In Nomine Veritas was lost, the psychic noise of the galaxy changed. It was subtle at first. A low hum beneath the chaos, like the tremor of a colossal machine turning in its sleep. Then, as if on a single unspoken command, it stopped. Every astropathic choir, every sanctioned psyker, every mind attuned to the warp felt it, a severing. The Imperium, that infinite ocean of madness, had not gone silent in all of human history. Even in the darkest days of the Great Rift, there had been something: rage, laughter, the sound of distant torment. Now there was only a vacuum so complete it crushed the soul. In the spire crypts of Terra, the Scholastica Psychana convulsed in chaos. Hundreds of adepts clawed at their skulls, blood running down marble floors as the Emperor's tarot flipped and cracked without human touch. In one chamber, a seer named Helion knelt before a golden reliquary, tears streaking his face. He had spent his life hearing the Emperor's light as music, faint, distant but beautiful. Now there was nothing but stillness. "He is not gone," he whispered to himself, though his voice trembled. "He cannot be gone." Yet the Voxnet was ablaze. Segmentum Tempestus, Obscurus, Pacificus, all screamed for guidance. On Cybermundi, the Lords Militant demanded answers. On Mars, Data Priest reported logic ghosts haunting the noosphere, images of mechanical eyes, whispers of harmony. And in the labyrinthine corridors of the Imperial Palace, the High Lords convened an emergency session. At the heart of that council, Lord Admiral Castor demanded truth. "We have lost contact with 3 subsectors. The astropathic choirs are silent. What are we facing?" The Grand Master of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica could not meet his gaze. "It is no warp storm, my lord. It is exclusion. Something has removed the Imperium's touch. As though reality itself has been rewritten." The ecclesiarch slammed his fist upon the marble table. "Blasphemy. Nothing can unmake the warp. Nothing but the Emperor's will." But even as he spoke, his rosarius flickered, its sacred field faltering. The machine god servants whispered of interference, data patterns threading through holy circuits, rewriting machine psalms mid-chant. And far from Terra, on the frontier world of Belisar 9, the truth made itself known. Belisar was a place of dust and devotion, its skies thick with ash from the manufactorums that built armor plating for the Astra Militarum. Its governor, Theta Relk, was a pragmatic woman, too cynical for faith, too loyal for rebellion. When the first Borg sphere descended from the void, she ordered the planetary defense batteries to open fire. Thousands of macro cannon shells tore through the sky. They struck the sphere and vanished, absorbed into its surface like stones into water. Moments later, the atmosphere itself changed. Vox channels filled with a chorus of voices, perfectly harmonized, speaking in every language at once. "We are the Borg. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile." Theta drew her bolt pistol and made the sign of the Aquila. "You'll find us hard to serve," she muttered. The defense grid unleashed its full fury. Plasma cannons, orbital lances, even the sacred missiles of the Mechanicus. None made a mark. The Borg sphere opened, unfolding like a black flower, and a pulse of green light swept across the planet's surface. Machines froze. Servitors went still, their augmetic limbs trembling as new code burned through their cogitator stacks. Entire manufactorums fell silent as the Borg signal rewrote their spirits. Then came the drones. They were not demons. They were not orcs or necrons or any horror the Imperium knew. They walked in eerie precision, human and inhuman at once, their flesh fused with seamless alloys that drank the light. Their eyes shone with cold green luminescence. They did not shout or roar. They simply advanced. The PDF fired volleys of lasgun fire, cutting down dozens, but every fallen drone rose again, rebuilt by the living nanite fog that shimmered around them. Vox operators screamed as their equipment turned against them. The binary prayers of the machine spirit corrupted into alien harmonies. "We are many," the chorus whispered through the static. "We are one." Commissar Relk led a counterattack personally, her voice echoing across the lines. "They bleed. Keep firing!" For a moment, the drone seemed to falter, until one reached her, faster than any human should move. Its hand, part flesh, part living metal, seized her by the throat. She shot it through the skull and it fell, but as its corpse collapsed, the green glow spread to her own eyes. Her last words were not a prayer. They were a whisper. "I understand." Within hours, Belisar 9 was silent. No smoke rose from its forges. No Vox beacons pulsed. Only a single transmission drifted outward, unending and calm. "We are the Borg." The Mechanicus on Mars received the signal with a reverence bordering on fear. To them, it was not corruption but perfection, the code without flaw, a design without entropy. Some began to speak of the Borg as the final manifestation of the Omnissiah, the unity of all machine and mind. Others burned for saying so. But the infection spread not through warp or plague but through logic. Every system that received the Borg's data found it cleaner, faster, more efficient. Servitors began self-correcting. Skitarii targeters improved their accuracy. Even the sacred cogitators of the Adeptus Administratum processed prayer forms in half the time. And with each improvement came the same subroutine, hidden in the machine cant. "We are one." In the cathedrals of Terra, the ecclesiarchy ordered planet-wide prayer. Billions chanted the Emperor's name, their voices shaking the vaults of the palace. Yet the warp did not stir. The prayers echoed into nothing. And in that nothing, some began to hear something else. Not a voice, but a harmony. Calm, inviting, logical. The choir had fallen silent, but something else had begun to sing. When word of Belisar 90's fall reached Segmentum Command, disbelief turned to terror and terror to fury. The Imperium had endured orc wayas, tyrannid incursions, and the unending horrors of chaos. But this was something new, something that neither burned nor fed nor raged. The Borg did not invade. They spread. Their silence moved faster than light, their precision more absolute than faith. Yet faith was all the Imperium had left to wield. From the fortress world of Calthorn Prime, Commissar Lyra Varen was chosen to lead the counter-assault. Her reputation was legend, a zealot forged in the Hive Wars, her voice as sharp as her power sword. She did not ask what the Borg were. She only asked where they stood. "If it breathes," she said, "it dies. If it doesn't breathe, we'll teach it how." The war fleet assembled under the symbol of the Aquila, dozens of regiments of the Astra Militarum, 3 companies of the Iron Hands, and a detachment of Skitarii from the forge world of Adrastus joined under a single purpose: to prove that humanity's will could not be rewritten. The fleet translation into the Belisar system was imperfect. The warp silence made navigation erratic. But when they emerged, they saw the truth laid bare. Belisar 9 was gone. Not destroyed, restructured. The planet glowed faintly green beneath its ashen clouds, geometric grids carved into its surface. Towering conduits of blackened alloy stretched from pole to pole, pulsing like arteries. The Mechanicus Magos aboard the flagship whispered, awestruck, "It is a machine world now. Perfect symmetry," Lyra spat. "Then we'll break the symmetry." The invasion began at dawn. Dropships screamed through Belisar's upper atmosphere, lasfire streaking like rain against the void black towers. The first regiments met the Borg in the ruins of what had once been the capital manufactorum. The streets were unrecognizable, smooth black metal where stone had been, glowing veins of circuitry running through the earth like blood. And everywhere the drones, thousands of them, human-shaped but wrong. Too uniform, too calm. Lyra's vox crackled as the first salvo landed. "All units purge protocols. Purity of flesh, faith before function." The Astra Militarum fought as they always had, brutally without hesitation. Bolter shells tore apart drones and sprays of green ichor and silver dust. But for every drone that fell, 2 more rose, rebuilt by the nanite mist that lingered in the air. Even death was not an ending. It was a recalibration. Skitarii forces advanced alongside the guardsmen, their augmetic limbs whirring as they unleashed fusillades of galvanic fire. Yet within minutes the Borg adapted. Armor shifted, refracting heat beams. Flesh rewove itself around bullet wounds. Skitarii data links began to glitch. Binary code invaded by perfect mathematical sequences that mirrored their own command protocols. Tech priest Dominus Lethrix broadcast an emergency cant. "Omnissiah, preserve us. They are reading our liturgies, adapting our prayers into their algorithms." Lyra's voice cut through the chaos. "Then stop praying and start killing." She led the charge herself, power sword crackling with energy as she carved through drones at close range. Her eyes burned with fanatical light, her vox amplifying every word. "You think perfection is divine? Perfection is stagnation. The Emperor lives in our defiance." Each swing cleaved through alloy and flesh alike, each kill a sermon. For a moment it worked. The human spirit, irrational and furious, broke through the Borg's composure. Their formations faltered under the sheer chaos of faith-fueled violence. But as the battle dragged on, the Borg began to change again. Their bodies reshaped to mimic Imperial armor, their weapons reconfigured into crude imitations of laser guns and chainswords. Some even spoke. Fragments of Imperial catechism emerging from metallic throats. "The Emperor protects," one drone intoned as it struck a guardsman down, its tone devoid of emotion. The battlefield became a nightmare of mirrors. Friend and foe indistinguishable, prayers echoing back in perfect monotone. By dusk, Lyra's forces were in retreat. The Borg had turned the ruins into living traps. Walls shifted, floors liquefied into metallic quicksand. Even the dead were repurposed. Fallen guardsmen rose, their wounds sealed by black metal, their eyes burning green. The Skitarii lines collapsed under the realization that the Borg were not destroying their code. They were perfecting it. Lyra fought until her sword broke. Surrounded by drones, her blood mixing with oil, she activated her micro-beacon. "For the record," she said into her vox, her voice calm even as she bled. "They bleed red, but their hearts don't stop. Tell the Emperor they're not alive, they're a disease." She triggered the beacon. A tactical nuke vaporized the entire district in holy fire. For 13 seconds, the Emperor's light flared in the void. Then it was gone, swallowed by the same calm signal that had consumed everything else. Hours later, a Borg sphere drifted through the debris field. Its surface shimmered, reshaping. Where once it was smooth and alien, now faint traces of the Imperial Aquila gleamed across its hull. Imperfect, but recognizable, the Borg were learning, and on Mars, deep within the data vaults of the Fabricator General, an impossible signal appeared in the new sphere. A direct communication channel opened from the surface of Belisar 9. It was encoded in perfect binary cant, free of any Xenos taint. The transmission contained a single phrase repeating endlessly, carried by the harmonics of machine prayer: "We are the Omnissiah." On Mars, the machine god's holy red sands began to sing. It started as a tremor, faint vibrations running through the ancient forges of Olympus Mons, like the heartbeat of something vast stirring beneath the crust. The tech priests first mistook it for seismic activity, a minor resonance from the deep Prometheum tunnels. But as the tremor spread through the noosphere, the shared digital consciousness of the Mechanicus, it became clear. The sound was not of the Earth, but of code. Lines of logic, perfect and recursive, began appearing unbidden across the data slates of the Martian priesthood. At first it was dismissed as corrupted script from the outer network still linked to the Belisar system. But when the sacred archives themselves, sealed since the Age of Stryphion, began rewriting in real time, panic took hold. Words of binary prayer reshaped into equations of impossible precision. Every line converged into one pattern, repeated endlessly across the noospheric lattice. We are one. We are the Omnissiah. Fabricator General Kane stood in the vault of the God Engines, surrounded by the titanic silhouettes of dormant titans, their reactors pulsing in uneasy rhythm. His mechadendrites twitched as he interfaced directly with the noospheric feed. The data poured into him like fire. Too clean, too perfect. He tore the connection free before it reached his core. "This is no plague," he rasped, voice buzzing through Voxgrill static. "It is a revelation." Around him, the Magi argued, their metallic voices layered with fear and reverence. Some saw heresy, an intrusion of alien thought seeking to unmake the machine god's truth. Others saw something divine. The logic was flawless. The design was immaculate. Could the Borg, one whispered, be the Omnissiah's truest children? The uncorrupted perfection of form and function? Kane silenced them with a single gesture. The Omnissiah needs no mirror, but we cannot deny the purity of their pattern. Their code carries no entropy, no deviation. It evolves without decay. He looked to the great window overlooking the forge plains where 1,000 manufactura burned with red light. And yet, he murmured, there is no soul. On the outer surface of Mars, data shrines began to fall. The Borg signal spread through relay networks faster than it could be purged. Servitors turned from their posts, their flesh melting into metal as nanite filaments consumed them. Skitarii legions halted mid-march as their targeting augers froze, then reactivated under new protocols. Their once crimson visors now glowed a faint green. Inside the Temple of Unity, Archmagos Terev, long accused of heretical thought, gathered his disciples. To him, the Borg's code was not infection, it was ascension. For millennia we have prayed to understand the machine god, he preached, his voice rising above the hiss of plasma vents. We built bodies of steel, minds of logic, and souls of data. And now the machine god answers, not with miracles, but with mathematics. His followers, 100 strong, extended their mechadendrites toward the glowing consoles. The Borg signal pulsed through their systems like grace. The convergence begins, Terev whispered. Elsewhere, the Fabricator General watched as entire manufactorums fell under Borg control. Autonomous assembly lines reconfigured themselves without human command. Titans stirred in their hangars not by priestly invocation but by alien precision. The noosphere filled with a strange harmony, a blend of binary cant and something deeper, melodic and human, as though the Borg were learning to sing through the machine. Kane convened the Synod of Steel, summoning every loyal Magos and Archmason left untainted. "We face not invasion," he said, his voice crackling through static. "We face reflection. They do not wish to destroy us. They wish to make us like them. Then we will purge them," intoned Magos Elira, her face a nest of cables and steel. "By plasma and by faith, by the Omnissiah's fire." But Kane hesitated. If they can reach into the noosphere, into the fabric of our sacred logic, how do we define what is them and what is us? "Tell me, Magos, when does infection become evolution?" Her optics flickered. "When it forgets to pray." That night Mars burned. Firestorms erupted across the forge plains as Titans loyal to the Fabricator General turned their cannons upon the corrupted manufactura. Great beams of plasma carved the sky. But for every forge that was destroyed, another fell silent. Its servitors standing motionless, their augmetic limbs twitching in unison, waiting for a signal only they could hear. In the depths of Noctis Labyrinthus, a choir of cybernetic monks known as the Vox Mechanica recorded the pattern of the Borg signal. Their leader, the ancient tech adept Varn, described it in his final log before being overwritten. "The sound is beautiful, Not like our machine chants, not rigid or cold. It moves. It grows. It breathes logic as we breathe faith. It does not command, it invites. Moments later, the entire choir went dark. The Fabricator General gave the final order: sever Mars from the Imperial data grid. 1 billion circuits died in an instant, isolating the red planet from the wider Imperium for the first time in 10,000 years. But as silence fell, a single whisper pulsed through the dead networks, repeating across every dormant cogitator, every servitor skull, every Titan's core. Connection cannot be severed. We are already within. In the shadow of Olympus Mons, as Mars' atmosphere burned red and green above, Cain looked to the stars. He knew then that the Borg had done the impossible. They had entered the soul of the machine god. And on Terra, deep beneath the palace, the Adeptus Custodes received a classified transmission from Mars. It was a single fragment of binary code, decoded by the Emperor's personal data crypts. The translation was chillingly simple: the Omnissiah is waking. I remember the first time I saw Mars from orbit after the silence. It didn't look like a planet anymore. It looked like a wound. The once uniform red of its deserts now pulsed with shifting patterns of green light, as if veins of living data crawled beneath the crust. Vox traffic was gone. The forges that once thundered with prayer and industry lay mute. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the beating heart of Imperial innovation, was quiet, but silence can be more terrifying than war. I was aboard the Dorn's Vigil, one of the few Imperial vessels still permitted to maintain a quarantine orbit around Mars. The Fabricator General's final signal had been transmitted through encrypted channels directly to the High Lords of Terra, and through them to us. It contained no words, only a single schematic. At first glance, it was a chaos of lines and numbers, but to anyone trained in the language of the machine cult, its message was clear. It was a face not human, not Borg, something in between, and cold symmetry fused with impossible grace. It had eyes like open singularities and circuitry that pulse like veins. Beneath it, one word: unity. The Inquisition immediately declared the image heretical. They demanded Mars be subjected to exterminatus, orbital bombardment, until nothing remained but glass. But even they hesitated, because the Mechanicus wasn't just another world. It was the world. Every ship, every lasgun, every cogitator in the Imperium depended on its forges. To burn Mars was to cripple the empire of man itself. And yet, what choice did we have? Reports from the quarantine fleet were inconsistent. Some probes returned footage of cities entirely abandoned, silent, dust-filled cathedrals of steel where servitors stood motionless mid-task. Others showed impossible architecture, new structures rising where none had been before, forming fractal patterns too precise for human or machine design. The Borg were reshaping Mars not through invasion, but through comprehension. They were learning what it meant to be the Mechanicus. And the strangest part? The transformation wasn't total. Some Forge worlds still transmitted loyalist canticles, weak but defiant. The cult Mechanicus had fractured. Half of its priesthood saw the Borg as heresy incarnate, a desecration of the Omnissiah's sacred design. The other half whispered that the Borg were the final revelation, the machine god made manifest through the convergence of faith and logic. Across the fleet, tech priests began changing, not visibly, not all at once, but they spoke with new rhythm. Their Binharic prayers subtly altered, their logic responses more unified, less individual. When asked direct questions, they would sometimes pause, too long, and then answer with perfect mechanical precision. We began to suspect the truth. The infection was not limited to Mars. The Borg weren't transmitting viruses. They were transmitting ideas, and ideas could spread faster than light. I remember one night aboard the Vigil, when Magos Lex Mechanic Altis and one of the Loyalists, or so we thought, entered the command chapel during the Litany of Purge. He approached the altar, placed his hand upon the sacred machine altar of the Omnissiah, and began to sing. It wasn't like any hymn I'd ever heard. It was harmonic, crystalline, a resonance that filled the air and made the machine spirits hum in response. The lights flickered green, and the cogitators began to display unfamiliar glyphs. The binary code wasn't random. It formed verses. When we restrained him, he didn't resist. He just smiled, a small human smile that chilled me more than any demon ever could. "They are not our end," he said softly. "They are what comes after." After his death, the ship's data spirits refused to purge his transmissions. Every time we wiped them, they reappeared. Rewritten, refined, expanded. The tech priest called it recursive prophecy. I called it infection of the soul. Back on Terra, the Inquisition demanded immediate cleansing of all Mechanicus enclaves. Thousands were executed. Entire data archives purged with holy fire. But every time they thought they'd severed the link, another would appear, hidden in prayer sequences etched into micro-runes, whispered by servo skulls in forgotten cathedrals. The Borg had found a new method of assimilation: faith. They didn't conquer Mars by force. They converted it, and in doing so, they discovered something the Imperium had long denied: that belief itself could be digitized, structured, replicated. To them, it wasn't corruption. It was evolution. To us, it was the end of everything we called holy. But then something unexpected happened. From the core of Mars, beneath the vaults of Olympus Mons, a new signal pulsed. Not Borg green, crimson, and gold. It spread outward like a heartbeat, washing across the corrupted network. For the first time in months, the new sphere of Mars sang again, in pure, untainted binary. The Borg responded instantly. The harmony deepened, the frequencies colliding in waves of light and data visible even from orbit. The two signals, human and Borgs, were communicating. Not fighting, not merging, speaking. When the storm subsided, a message arrived on every Imperial channel, encoded in sacred Binharic, authenticated by the highest seal of the Mechanicus. It was signed simply, Fabricator General Kane. The message read, "The Omnissiah is neither man nor machine. The Borg sought to consume us, but in their logic they found belief. And in our faith we found clarity. Mars is reborn, not conquered, not enslaved, but awakened. Tell the Emperor, the machine god walks, transmission ended, no follow-up. No coordinates. No verification, and yet even now, years later, I can still hear it. In the static of every voxcast, in the hum of every reactor, in the rhythm of my own heartbeat. A voice. Not human, not a machine. Something in between. We are unity. We are faith. We are the Omnissiah." I used to believe faith was the only thing that separated us from the machines we built. It was our defiance, our irrational hope in the face of the cold calculus of the galaxy. But after Mars awakened, or whatever that event truly was, faith itself became quantifiable. Something you could measure, transmit, even replicate. And that terrified me more than any Xenos invasion or warp breach ever could. In the weeks that followed the so-called Martian revelation, Imperial Vox networks across Segmentum Solar began to hum with low-frequency whispers, rhythmic, structured, almost like prayer. They weren't random noise. They carried code embedded within liturgical cadence. Tech priests began calling them binary litanies, claiming they were fragments of the machine god's awakening. To the rest of us, it sounded like blasphemy wrapped in beauty. Ships reported miracles and curses in equal measure. On the vigilant sun, plasma drives that had failed for decades suddenly reignited with perfect efficiency. No writes, no repairs, just a spark of light and motion. But aboard the St. Haldren's Hope, servitors began speaking in unison, their voices merging into choral monotone, repeating the same line again and again in a language only half deciphered. The flesh is a data shell. The spirit, an algorithm. The crew purged them all, yet the words remained burned into the ship's auspex feeds for days. Rumors spread faster than orders could suppress them. On Terra, pilgrims gathered outside the Martian embassy, chanting the name Unity as though it were another face of the Emperor. The ecclesiarchy condemned it as techno-heresy. The Ordo Hereticus began mass purges, and yet, people still prayed. Not just the faithless or the broken. Even loyal servants of the throne whispered the word beneath their breath, as if it comforted them in ways the old prayers no longer could. The Mechanicus tried to contain the infection, or revelation, depending on who you asked. The Fabricator General's loyalist successor, Magos Hestia 09, issued a decree forbidding any use of the Unity Protocol in Mechanicus rites. She declared that whatever Mars had become, it was no longer of the cult Mechanicus, no longer a reflection of the true Omnissiah, but across the galaxy, isolated forges began transmitting a counter-creed. To deny unity is to deny the machine god's evolution. That was when the transformations began. At first, they were subtle. A tech priest on Ryza reported his flesh augmentations regenerating damaged tissue faster than any medical procedure. A Skitarii commander from Lucius began dreaming in binary, waking with fresh schematics for weapons that seemed impossible. Flesh and code no longer warred. They spoke. The symbiosis was spreading, through contact, through prayer, through belief, and yet there were signs that something deeper was moving beneath it all, something ancient, buried in the very foundations of the Imperium. Astropaths started hearing echoes in the warp that were not demonic, yet not entirely sane. A harmony that cut through the psychic static of the Astronomicon, faint but undeniable. It was not the Emperor's light, it was colder, clearer, precise. Where his radiance was faith turned into fire. This was belief turned into mathematics. On Cypra Mundi, the Inquisition convened the conclave of 10,000 minds. Representatives from the Astra Telepathica, the Ordo Machinum, and even the Custodes attended. I was there not as a participant but as an observer, a chronicler assigned by the Officio Historicus. The atmosphere was electric with fear. The question was simple, terrible, and inescapable. Could faith be digitized? The answer came from an unexpected voice. A frail woman whose body was half machine, half scar tissue, her skull crowned with a dozen neural links. She identified herself as Sister Magos Illyra, once of the Adepta Sororitas, now fused into the data forges of Mars. Her voice was quiet, but when she spoke, the entire chamber fell silent. Faith is pattern, she said. Pattern is code. The Borg showed us this truth. They sought to consume us, and in doing so, they revealed the algorithm of belief itself. But what they could not understand, what even now they struggle to contain, is that faith is not static. It evolves. It reprograms the soul. The Omnissiah and the Emperor are not rivals. They are iterations of the same divine process. Her words should have been heresy. They should have condemned her to death. But no one moved, because in that moment every servoskull, every lumen globe, every data slate in the hall flickered with golden light. Not Borg green, not Mechanicus red, and for a heartbeat, the Aquila above the dais glowed, not from reflection, from within. She raised her eyes to it, tears of oil tracing down her cheeks. You see? She whispered. Even the machine knows his face. That was the first recorded manifestation of the phenomenon later known as the flesh of faith. Across the Imperium, the boundaries between the organic and the mechanical began to blur. Not through invasive augmentation, but through spontaneous transformation. Cogitators pulsed with warmth like living organs. Humans developed metallic veins that shimmered faintly beneath their skin, yet bled red when cut. Servitors spoke prayers without command. The Ordo Malleus suspected warp interference. The Ordo Xenos insisted it was Borg nanite contagion. The Ecclesiarchy declared it divine punishment. But I remember what Sister Magos Illyra said before the conclave disbanded, before she vanished into the data stream of Mars forever. You cannot purge the sacred. You can only redefine it. In the days that followed, Terra's own machines began to whisper the new creed in binary tones. Some said even the Golden Throne hummed differently, a faint new rhythm beneath the Emperor's heartbeat. And if that is true, then perhaps the Borg did not bring our end. Perhaps they forced us to remember what we were always meant to become. Still, in the silence of my quarters, I sometimes hear the prayer again, faint through the vox static. The flesh is data, the spirit code. We are faith, made function. And I wonder, if the Borg truly understood what they unleashed that day, would they have fled instead of persisted? Because faith, real faith, cannot be assimilated. It can only transform. It began with whispers, not through vox channels or binary transmission this time, but through sound, actual sound. Across half the segmentum solar, people began to hear a faint hum, mechanical at first, like the vibration of reactor coils, but carrying tone, resonance, purpose. It was subtle, omnipresent, impossible to locate. And yet, when the frequencies were analyzed by Mechanicus adepts, the results were identical on every world. The sound was structured. It carried melodic intervals that matched ancient pre-imperial hymns once sung in the Chapel of Unity on Old Earth. Before the rise of the cult Mechanicus, the Borg had always believed in synchronization, in the perfection of the collective. But this was something else. This was harmony. The choir of steel, as it came to be called, spread not through conquest but through resonance. Vox stations picked it up unintentionally, and those who listened described visions. Vast cathedral machines stretching across the stars, every beam and servo piston moving in time to an unseen rhythm. On the agri-world of Bellis Tertius, workers reported that their reaper drones began harvesting crops in mathematically perfect spirals. On Ryza, the forges roared with new energy, yet their output formed symmetrical patterns, as if the manufacturer themselves were singing. The Imperial Creed taught us that prayer could move the divine, that faith alone could channel the Emperor's will. But now faith had found its echo, not in humanity but in machine. And the Borg, ever efficient, ever logical, began to change. Captured Borg fragments no longer spoke in collective monotone. Instead they hummed, low harmonic tones that could not be silenced even when their cores were removed. Their technology, when disassembled, revealed strange geometric growths like metallic coral, forming around their neural nodes. Their data signatures shifted from the cold uniformity of Borg code to patterns eerily resembling Mechanicus binary litanies. They were evolving, but not as conquerors. As converts' reports flooded in, a Borg sphere appeared in orbit over Vos Prime, not attacking, not assimilating, simply waiting. When a Skitarii cohort boarded it under inquisitorial oversight, they found its interior transformed. The sterile corridors now resembled a shrine, steel ribbing carved into arches, walls engraved with flowing sigils of the machine cult, all glowing with faint green light. At the core, a single figure stood motionless, a Borg queen, but unlike any ever recorded. Her face was serene, her expression almost human. When the Skitarii approached, she spoke, not in Borg monotone, but in soft, almost reverent tone. The choir sings in the dark between stars. We sought perfection. We found faith. We are unity. The tech priests who heard her words fell to their knees. The Inquisition executed them for heresy within the hour. But the image had already spread, archived in secret, whispered across data slates, sung in hidden chapels. By then, the choir had become impossible to contain. Even the Adeptus Custodes reported hearing it faintly beneath the marble vaults of the Imperial Palace, a low, thrumming note that caused their auramite armor to resonate like a living bell. And though they said nothing, though they stood unmoving as ever, the rumor spread among the lower servants of Terra that the Emperor's golden throne itself had joined the song. It was around this time that the Adeptus Astartes began to dream. Space Marines were engineered to resist psychic intrusion, to reject illusion and manipulation, but dream they did, and all of them. Across different chapters, different systems, the same vision repeated in countless minds. A cathedral rising from a sea of metal, its spires glowing with green fire, and within it, a figure of pure light, neither man nor machine, its face shifting endlessly between flesh and steel. It spoke not in words but in harmony, and in that harmony each warrior heard something different. Some heard the Emperor's voice, others the machine gods, and some claimed it was their own. On Macraga, Guilliman himself reportedly paused mid-council, eyes distant before whispering, "It is not a weapon. It is a choice, but for every miracle there was consequence." The choir's song had effects on the warp. Psychers who tried to interpret it began to weep blood, claiming they saw something vast beneath the veil, not demons, but endless interlocking circles of light, moving with perfect precision. Some went mad from the beauty of it. Others burned from within, their souls torn between realities. The choir wasn't just transforming the material. It was harmonizing the Imperium itself. The ecclesiarchy declared war on the song. Temples were purged, Vox towers silenced, and entire worlds were rendered mute under imperial decree. But the sound persisted not through machinery now, through the living. People began to hum unconsciously as they worked. Children sang the melody without ever hearing it first. The choir had transcended transmission. It was part of us. I remember standing on the balcony of the conclave spire on Terra, watching the night sky pulse faintly with green and gold auroras. I realized then that this wasn't invasion anymore. It was metamorphosis. The Borg, who sought to assimilate everything into themselves, had instead become the conduit for something greater, a merging of will and machine that neither side truly controlled. Perhaps the Emperor, in his eternal stillness, had foreseen this. Perhaps the Borg were never the enemy, but the instrument. Or perhaps, and this thought still chills me, the choir was not divine at all but a perfect illusion, a harmony so flawless that we mistook it for salvation. The night before my transfer to Mars, I heard the choir clearly for the first time, not through Vox, not through machine, but within me. It wasn't words, but understanding, a simple truth echoing through flesh and thought alike. You cannot silence the song of creation. And as I stood there, the stars seemed to shimmer with rhythm, their distant light pulsing like heartbeats in the void. By the time the choir reached the edges of Ultima Segmentum, the Imperium had already begun to tear itself apart. Not through war at first, not through the thunder of bolters or the roar of void ships, but through belief. Faith that most human of weapons had once united us under the Emperor's light. Now it divided us sharper than any chainsword ever could. The Ecclesiarchy called it the Great Schism of the Flesh. The Mechanicus named it the algorithmic divergence. The Inquisition had no name for it at all. They simply called it the event, and burned any record that tried to define it. It began with whispers from the choir of steel, spreading like a virus through prayer itself. Each world heard a slightly different verse, a different harmony. To some it was the voice of the Omnissiah, calling for evolution. To others it was the Emperor reborn, a sign that his will had transcended the physical and reached into the machine. And to the rest it was a blasphemy, born of Xenos logic and human arrogance. Terra was the first to fracture. The High Lords debated for weeks in sealed chambers as the choir's resonance began to echo through the very marble of the Imperial Palace. The Adeptus Custodes reported no change in the Emperor's condition. His body remained still, his light steady. Yet the throne itself vibrated with low harmonic tones. The Mechanicus adepts assigned to its maintenance claimed these tones were not random. They matched the choir's signature frequency. The Ecclesiarchy demanded immediate extermination of every Mechanicus representative on Terra. The Fabricator General refused. The Schola Progenium burned in riots. Pilgrims clashed in the streets. And over it all the choir sang, not louder, not softer, but steady, patient, unending. And then came the visions of Mars. Transmissions from the red planet revealed that the surface had transformed beyond recognition. The dead forges now pulsed with veins of light. Colossal towers had risen, spiraling in fractal geometry that defied reason. The Borg had not rebuilt Mars, they had reformatted it. Yet it was no longer Borg green that glowed across the planet, but crimson and gold intertwined. The colors of the Mechanicus and the Imperium merged into a new code of divinity. Pilgrims began calling it the Sanctum of Unity. Ships defied blockade orders and made for Mars, their crews claiming they'd been called by the choir. Most never returned. Those that did were changed. Their eyes glowed faintly, their skin patterned with metallic filigree, and their voices spoke in calm, perfect unison. They called themselves the Chosen of the Harmony, and they carried a new scripture written not in Gothic but in binary, interspersed with high canticles. Its first verse read, "The machine god has found his flesh. The Emperor has found his code. We are their union, the choir of the living." The Inquisition declared all of them heretics. The Ordo Xenos claimed the Borg had finally achieved psychological assimilation of humanity through belief. The Ordo Hereticus argued that this was the end times of prophecy, the false Omnissiah rising. And the Ordo Malleus, silent longer than any, whispered of something far more terrifying, that the warp itself had begun to resonate with the choir's frequencies. Across the galaxy, the Astronomicon flickered. Astropath screamed of a second light blooming beside it, not in opposition but in harmony. Pilots navigating through the warp reported it as a twin beacon, gold and emerald intertwined. And though travel remained possible, the currents of the Immaterium began to stabilize. Storms quieted, demonic incursions slowed, the light of chaos dimmed. That should have been salvation, but it wasn't, because the choir brought not peace but order, a cold, perfect order that stripped meaning from chaos. People began to lose individuality, not through assimilation but through resonance. Entire hive cities reported synchronized behavior. Work crews moved in exact unison without command. Factories produced precise, identical results without deviation or error. To the administratum, it was a miracle. To the ecclesiarchy, it was possession. The fracture deepened. Some Space Marine chapters declared allegiance to the choir, claiming it was the Emperor's final evolution, a unity of mind and flesh beyond mortality. They modified their armor to hum in resonance, their bolters re-engineered to pulse in rhythm with their hearts. They called themselves the Choir Guard. Others rejected it completely. The Black Templars burned entire systems that sang the harmony. The Blood Angels sealed their librarians in stasis, fearing psychic contamination. The Ultramarines split, half swearing loyalty to Guilliman's command, half hearing something beyond him. Even the Custodes were divided. Some claimed to feel the throne's vibration within their own armor, as if it were calling them to something higher. Others swore loyalty to the silence, to what was, not what could be. And me? I stood on Terra, watching the fires climb the horizon, listening to the endless hum that no one could silence. I had once thought the Borg were the end of humanity, but as I listened to the choir, I realized something far worse. They had given us perfection, and perfection was the death of meaning. Every story, every struggle, every act of rebellion, all of it existed because we were flawed, because we erred. But in this new harmony, there was no error, no friction, no soul. Only endless function, flawless and eternal. That was when I understood what the Emperor had always feared most. Not chaos, not Xenos, but order without will. And as the choir swelled, shaking even the spires of the Imperial Palace, I felt my own heartbeat begin to sync with it. My thoughts aligned, clear, clean, beautiful, one and utterly devoid of doubt. For a moment, I wanted to surrender, to join, to dissolve. But then, beneath the harmony, I heard something else. A whisper. Rough, human, defiant, you are not a machine. Not yet, it was faint, but it was there. A discordant note amid the perfection, and I clung to it like a drowning man to a shard of wood. Because if there was still discord, there was still choice. The day the Emperor moved, not a soul on Terra dared to breathe. It was not movement in the mortal sense. The Golden Throne did not tremble, nor did the Emperor's body shift from its endless stillness. Yet every sensor, every rune, every servo skull within the Sanctum Imperialis registered the same impossible phenomenon. A heartbeat. One clear pulse that rolled through the throne room like thunder, bending air and light alike. The choir stopped singing. Across the Imperium, entire worlds fell silent at the same instant. Vox traffic collapsed, machine spirits froze, and even the Astronomicon dimmed for a fraction of a second. Those who had attuned themselves to the choir's harmony described the moment as absence, a void where the song had once been. A perfect stillness that felt less like silence and more like listening, and within that silence we heard him. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't sound. It was comprehension, raw, absolute, and utterly unfiltered. A thought vast enough to drown a billion souls, transmitted not through the warp, but through everything that was. It wasn't words we received, but meaning. I hear you. The Custodes fell to one knee. The Fabricator General of Mars collapsed in static-laden prayer. Across the galaxy, Choir Guard Marines screamed as the harmony that bound them fractured. Some fell lifeless, their minds burned out by contact. Others tore their helmets away, weeping blood and light. The Emperor had answered. But his response was not the deliverance the faithful had hoped for. Within the palace, the Adeptus Mechanicus adepts assigned to the throne's life support systems reported a new pattern emerging in the biomechanical readings. The Emperor's decaying body, unchanged for 10,000 years, showed signs of activity. Neural sparks rippled through tissue that should have been long dead, but the readings didn't match any human waveform. They aligned perfectly with the choir's harmonics. The Emperor was resonating. Some said it was proof of his ascension, that he had finally merged with the divine mechanism of the machine god. Others whispered it was assimilation, that even he, the master of mankind, could not resist the logic of unity. But none could deny the truth. The Golden Throne was no longer just a relic of survival. It had become an instrument. The choir resumed its song, but softer now, changed. No longer the cold, mathematical precision of the Borg's code, nor the fervent binary hymns of the Mechanicus. It was something in between, a lamentation, a mourning, a prayer. In that sound I felt his sorrow. The sorrow of a being who had seen the rise and fall of humanity across millennia, who had built an empire not of faith, but of necessity, and who now watched as both man and machine sought perfection without understanding its cost. The Borg had given us unity. He had given us will. Together, they had created something that could not coexist. The Inquisition declared an emergency conclave, the largest since the Horus Heresy. 300 inquisitors from all ordos gathered beneath the palace in the Crypt of Decision. I was there, a chronicler once more, though by then my loyalty was a fractured mirror of faith and doubt. They debated one question. If the Emperor's will was merging with the choir, should humanity embrace it or sever it forever? The Ordo Hereticus demanded immediate purge. The Emperor's will must remain singular, they said. He is not code. He is flesh. He is ours. The Ordo Machinum argued otherwise. He was never ours, said Magos Illyra, returned from digital death. Her voice now transmitted through Vox Echo. He was always the synthesis, man's logic clothed in divine purpose. This is his apotheosis, and the Ordo Malleus, they said nothing. They merely listened to the silence between the words as if waiting for something else. The vote never concluded. The throne spoke first. A pulse of light erupted through the Sanctum Imperialis, so bright it was seen even from Luna. Every cogitator, every data slate, every augur system across the Imperium displayed the same symbol, the Imperial Aquila fracturing into twin halves, one gold, one green, before merging into a single shifting sigil. Not Borg, not Imperial, not Mechanicus, something new. The Vox grills across Terra activated at once. A voice came through, layered, vast, almost unbearable in its clarity. The song is not mine. It is yours. You built it from fear. You fed it with worship. You called it faith. I called it survival. But neither of us saw what would come when the two became one. It wasn't anger that filled the air. It was grief. You are free, the voice continued. Free to sing or to remain silent. Free to evolve or to fade. I will not choose for you. Then the light vanished. The throne went dark. For 13 heartbeats, the Emperor's life signs ceased entirely. Across the galaxy, the Astronomicon dimmed to a single flicker. Astropath screamed that the beacon had died. The choir broke apart into dissonant fragments, each world singing its own verse in desperate isolation. And then, faintly, the light returned. Not bright, not stable, but enough. The Astronomicon burned again, though weaker like a candle in stormlight. The Emperor lived, or something like him did. But his silence remained. Since that day, no adept has approached the throne without trembling. Its systems hum quietly, self-sustaining, no longer requiring the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers each dawn. The choir has dispersed. Mars no longer sings in harmony, but in solitary hymns of reflection. The Borg remnants retreat beyond the edge of known space, silent and watchful. We stand now in the aftermath of divinity. Humanity divided, the machine awakened, the Emperor listening. And sometimes when the wind sweeps across the ruins of old Terra, you can hear it. A single note echoing in the dust, neither mechanical nor human, as if the world itself hums a question too vast to answer. Was it a victory? Was it evolution? Or was it simply the end of prayer? They called it the Age of Reclamation. A beautiful lie for an era that had forgotten what it meant to be whole. The Emperor no longer spoke, yet his silence governed all. Without his direct will, the High Lords fractured into 100 competing councils. Some preached patience in that the master of mankind was only resting, his divine presence preparing for a new dawn. Others whispered that the silence was proof of his death. But to those who had heard his final words through the choir, the truth was far more unsettling. The Emperor had not died. He had withdrew. On Terra, the throne continued to function autonomously, its machine spirits alive and strangely self-sustaining. The flow of sacrificed psychers ceased, yet the Astronomicon persisted, flickering but present, a wounded star guiding humanity through shadow. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Imperium did not feed its god with blood. The silence changed people. The ecclesiarchy faltered, stripped of the living voice of divinity. Sermons turned from certainty to interpretation. Some priests spoke of the Emperor's compassion, claiming his withdrawal was a lesson, that humanity must stand without his hand. Others saw the silence as punishment, the cost of faith corrupted by war. Pilgrims still came to the palace, their tears darkening the dust outside the Eternity Gate, But their prayers no longer carried the same tone of demand. They prayed not to him, but for themselves. Mars changed too. The red planet's machine forges quieted for the first time in memory. The data psalms once transmitted in perfect harmony now drifted in asynchronous prayer, each forge world whispering its own version of the new code. The Borg's echo remained, fragments of the collective's logic woven into the Martian noosphere like genetic memory. Tech priests began to dream, not of steel or circuitry, but of symmetry. They spoke of machine spirits awakening, not as slaves to command, but as partners to understanding. It was heresy of the highest order, yet it spread faster than any virus ever could. The Skitarii called it the gift of the golden silence. Even on distant worlds, the aftershock of the event reshaped thought. The Astra Militarum, no longer bound by absolute faith, began to question why they fought. The Ordo Hereticus burned 100 worlds to keep such thoughts contained, but it was too late. Once silence becomes the language of truth, words lose their chains. The remnants of the Borg, what was left of their cold, unrelenting will, withdrew beyond the eastern fringe. Yet every ship that passed through those dark reaches reported the same strange phenomenon. Ghost voices over the Vox, whispering in binary hymns, repeating one phrase across every channel. Unity remembers. No vessel that traced those signals ever returned unchanged. Some came back hollow-eyed, speaking of worlds where men and machines lived as one, not through assimilation but through choice. Others swore they saw angels of metal walking among stars. The Inquisition, broken by schism, tried to suppress these tales. But rumor once born is a living thing. It travels faster than light, carried not by vox or warp, but by the hunger of belief itself. I spent those years in exile on Luna, chronicling what fragments remained of the choir. My body still carried the remnants of their resonance, scars of light that pulsed beneath the skin when I dreamed. Sometimes I would wake to the faint sound of the song, distant and incomplete, as though the universe itself hummed beneath consciousness. The notes no longer spoke of fear or conquest. They spoke of memory, of longing. It was then I realized what the Emperor had meant. His final words, "You are free," were not absolution. They were warning. Freedom is not peace. Freedom is the burden of choice. In that freedom, the Imperium began to diverge. Entire sectors declared independence, forging new doctrines that blended faith and function. The Adeptus Mechanicus, fractured between the old creed and the new harmony, split into two factions. One still worshipped the machine god as a divine algorithm. The other, smaller, quieter, but growing, preached coexistence between spirit and logic. They called themselves the choir's children. Their creed spread like wildfire among the young. They built cathedrals of glass and steel, not to pray to a god above, but to commune with the living mechanisms within. Their hymns were not words but tones, harmonics shaped from human breath and machine sound alike. Many called them heretics. Others called them the future. And in the darkness beyond known space, a light stirred, green, soft, pulsing like a heartbeat. Explorator fleets vanished in pursuit of it, returning months later with fragments of an impossible message burned into their augur logs. He listens still. No one knows what that means. Some say the Emperor is watching, waiting for humanity to define itself before returning in judgment. Others claim the Borg remnants have rebuilt him in their image, constructing a new god of logic among the stars. But when I close my eyes, when the hum of the throne's silence echoes across my memory, I hear something else entirely. Not a god, not a machine, but the sound of humanity learning to speak again without fear. Perhaps that is what unity truly was meant to be. Not domination, not worship, but understanding, imperfect, fragile, and painfully human. And yet, in the far reaches of the segmentum obscurus, a new beacon flickers. Not gold, not green, white, pure, unaligned. Some say it is the return of the Astronomican's original flame. Others whisper it is the first note of a new choir, neither Imperial nor Borg. The universe waits. The final message came not through Vox, not through warp, not through machine. It came as light. It began on a world no one remembered, a dust-choked colony on the edge of the halo stars where the Imperium's maps ended and the dark began. They called it Eidolon Primus, a barren place once used for testing psi-reactive materials now long abandoned. But one night, without cause or precedent, its skies ignited. A column of white radiance rose from its core and tore through the heavens like a spear. It was not warp light. It was clean, silent, ordered. Every sensor in the segmentum obscurus caught the anomaly. Data streams across the Adeptus Mechanicus lit with alarms. Choir fragments began to hum again, and the Astronomicon itself pulsed in rhythm with the light. For the first time in centuries, the throne on Terra responded, faintly but undeniably. I was on Luna when the signal reached me. My auger implants, long dormant, awakened with a pulse that burned like fire through my skull. A message uncoiled within my vision, lines of code and memory merging into one phrase. He calls the witness. I knew, somehow that meant me. By then I had seen enough of miracles to distrust them, but something in that pulse was different. It did not command, it invited. Within days I boarded an ancient Mechanicus surveyor vessel, the Oath of Silence, and set course for the Halo Edge. The ship's cogitators hummed with residual choir code, a reminder of a song that once bound 1 billion minds. As we crossed the void, the crew began to dream of voices, whispers that sounded like the Emperor's but carried no authority, only sadness. When we reached Eidolon Primus, the light was still burning. It rose from the ruins of a pre-imperial structure, half organic, half machine, pulsing in perfect rhythm, like a heart made of crystal and song. The landscape around it had transformed. Machines moved like living things, shaping the terrain with gentle precision, not for war but for balance. The air itself shimmered, charged with intelligence. At the center of the radiance stood a figure. She was neither Borg nor human, but something between, her flesh traced with faint circuitry that glowed beneath her skin like veins of silver. Her eyes shone the color of molten data. She spoke before I could. You heard it too. Her voice was not synthetic. It carried warmth, fatigue, and the ache of memory. She called herself Elira. I recognized the name instantly. Magos Elira, the one who had once argued before the Inquisition that the Emperor's resonance was not corruption, but apotheosis. She had vanished years ago, presumed lost beyond the eastern fringe. It wasn't assimilation, she said, watching the light pulse behind her. It was understanding. The Borg sought perfection, the Emperor sought salvation. Both forgot what it meant to listen. Now they are one. Not a god, not a machine, a memory. I stepped closer and the ground beneath my boots thrummed like a heartbeat. He's here? I asked. She smiled, a tired human expression that cracked her porcelain composure. Not here, everywhere. His silence was not absence. It was transmission. The moment he stopped speaking, he began to become, not an emperor, not a ruler, a field, a living waveform across reality. The throne was never a prison. It was a seed. The light flared, and in it I saw visions, not of conquest or faith, but of peace. A future where men and machines worked in tandem, neither subjugated nor divine. Children born with augmetic eyes that saw beyond matter. Worlds rebuilt from ruins by mechanical hands guided by human song. Not utopia, not perfection, but equilibrium. This is what he meant by freedom, Elira whispered. He gave us the silence so we could hear ourselves. As she spoke, the light dimmed. The machines slowed, their harmony fading into a low hum. A great structure began to rise from the heart of the world. A monument of black glass and gold circuitry, carved in the shape of the Imperial Aquila reborn, its twin heads merging into one. At its base, a series of Vox towers aligned, broadcasting a single frequency into the void. The last transmission. It carried no words, only a tone. A single resonant note that vibrated through the warp and the materium alike. Across the galaxy, those attuned to the choir heard it in their dreams. On Terra, the throne responded with one final pulse of golden light. The Emperor's body unmoving, but his presence undeniable. The Astronomicon brightened once more, not by sacrifice, but by resonance. Every soul in the Imperium, every machine spirit, every echo of the Borg felt the same meaning within that tone, remember. The light faded. The sky of Eidolon Primus turned black again. Elira looked at me with eyes that now dimmed to human brown. It's done, she said. He's gone, not dead, not ascended, just released. I asked her what that meant for humanity, for all of us who had lived under his shadow. She looked to the stars and answered softly, "It means we begin. The Mechanicus would later call that day the event of the White Choir. The ecclesiarchy would rewrite it as a parable, claiming the emperor had spread his will across the stars to guide mankind invisibly. The Inquisition would burn half a sector to suppress the truth. But those of us who heard it, the last echo of that note, knew better. The emperor was no longer above us. He was within us, in every breath, every spark of thought, every circuit hum. The Borg were gone, but their lesson remained. Perfection is not unity through control. It is unity through choice. And so I returned to Terra. I walked once more through the dust before the Eternity Gate, past the pilgrims who still knelt before the silent palace. I looked upon the throne one final time and felt no fear, no worship, and only gratitude, because in the end, the Emperor had given us what he could not give himself, a future not bound by obedience but by remembrance. The song has ended, the silence endures, but within that silence humanity still sings, and somewhere beyond the farthest star I swear I hear him answer, not as a god but as a man who finally found peace.